Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to our webinar today. We're going to go ahead and get started right on time. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Eliza Berry, Marketing Director at Richey May Technology Solutions. And today we're going to be talking about cloud security for mortgage banking, particularly referring to cloud apps like O365 and G Suite. Doing our presentation today, we have JT Galletto. He's the Executive Director of Cybersecurity at Richey May. And we also have our partners, Managed Methods. Joey Sorensen, their account executive, is going to be talking about specific tips and solutions that Managed Methods has for these apps, and do a little bit of a product demo so that you guys can see the different solutions that they offer. We have partnered with them for our clients in especially the mortgage and media and entertainment businesses, because those, as you'll see, are affected by some recent trends that JT is going to take us through. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. Either I or Elisa Goldschmidt from Managed Methods will handle those, and we'll talk through them at the end, or as they apply to the presentation during the course of it. There's a short survey after the presentation as well. It'll just pop up in your browser. It's only 2 questions, so go ahead and answer it. And you will receive an email with the recording of this presentation and the slide materials in a few days. So thank you again for attending, and JT, go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Eliza, and thanks everybody for attending today. Just a quick overview of our agenda. I'm going to do a quick intro around Richey May and the Technology Solutions Group, as well as we're going to cover who Managed Methods is and what they provide, and the reality of what the cloud app landscape looks like in the independent mortgage banking space, and how tools like Managed Methods secures the cloud and the personally identifiable and consumer data that you're storing there. So with that, let's talk a little bit about some of let's talk a little bit about the firm itself. And for those of you that know Richey May, the Technology Solutions Group really focuses on a number of different areas, including cybersecurity and cloud services, which we're going to talk about today. But we also have comprehensive solutions around GRC and business intelligence and financial forecasting. So with the state of the industry, and this is something that's been continuously evolving, but these statistics are actually from the 2019 Verizon Data Breach Report. And from that report, what we saw was last year in 2018, there was a little over 40,000 cyber-related incidents that were reported. And for the first time in a really long time, the financial services industry actually slipped to 3rd place as the most impacted industry. It had shared that the spotlight in the second place, overshadowed by the government and other public entities, but we've slipped down into 3rd place. The key differentiator here, though, is that nearly half of those incidents impacted small to mid-sized companies, and within that, we have to think about the cost of remediation. And the Ponyman Institute, which is a cybersecurity think tank based out of Michigan, follows the costs that the organizations incur as they remediate these, and have found that nearly for every record that's lost during a privacy breach, it costs that organization about $150 per record. And while on the surface that doesn't seem like a whole lot of money, the reality is that there's a compounding effect here. And just think about the vast number of consumer records that you have within your own organizations. The numbers can get pretty staggering. And so with that, there are really 4 significant trends that we're seeing in the cybersecurity space. And one is mature regulation. And these are regulations that we've had around for quite some time. But because the threat landscape continues to change and evolve, we're seeing new and increased regulation, mostly at the state level. And it's because of the different types of attacks. We're also seeing that the bad guys are monetizing these attacks, right? That's their key driver. Gone are the days of people just trying to compromise information and data for bragging rights, the attackers are here to make some money off our data. And lastly, because of just growth in general in the mortgage industry, we're seeing a lot of demand and migration to cloud services such as Microsoft's Office 365, as well as Google's G Suite. So first, around the mature regulation, most everybody here knows about GLBA. This regulation's been on the books for quite some time, and there's a provision in there called the Safeguards Rule. And within the Safeguards Rule, the law actually says, hey, you have to take what they deem as reasonable steps to protect consumers' data. And that's mainly financial data underneath GLBA. And what's interesting is what was deemed reasonable when this law first came into effect is different than what was deemed reasonable in 2002, which is different than what we saw was reasonable in 2012, which is much different than what we see as reasonable now in 2019. And one of the interesting things about that is that the New York State Department of Financial Services created the NYCRR.500 law, and it was created in 2017, and we're living through the first year of it being fully enacted starting this past March. But what legal experts are saying, and what the trend we're seeing, is that what is deemed reasonable are the same requirements that are in New York. So even if you're not licensed in New York or do business in New York, you're being held to the standard of New York. And those standards include having multi-factor authentication for all remote access, encrypting all consumer data in transit at rest and on all devices. That includes laptops, smartphones, things of that nature. Having a comprehensive vendor risk management program and consistent patching to control those devices. And really, what's interesting about all that is the bar continues to move from the state level, right? So we saw last year Colorado and Arizona and Ohio also institute new data privacy and cybersecurity legislation. One of the unique pieces around Arizona is it also added civil penalties. And those civil penalties range from anywhere from $10,000 to $500,000 per incident. And while Ohio also has financial penalties, they're not on the civil side. They can be leveraged by the state's attorneys general. What's interesting here is they actually instituted a safe harbor provision, and in that safe harbor provision, it says companies that take and adopt specific frameworks like the NIST 853 or PCI DSS, even if you're not a card processor, it shows that you in a good faith method try to implement reasonable controls to protect that consumer data. And it may either fully limit your exposure from a financial penalty, or at least reduce it greatly. And that's something to really be cognizant of as we look at these regulations and how they evolve over time. The new kid on the block, if you will, from a regulatory perspective, is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And this is actually a little bit of a different animal because it's very similar to what the European Union established underneath their GDPR requirement. And it focuses on consumers from the state of California. And it does a number of different things. The first one being it establishes the right for a consumer to be forgotten, to request what kind of data you have about them, where that data is stored, how that data is utilized. And it also takes a very broad definition of what consumer data is. And traditionally, we think of a consumer data as non-public, personally identifiable information. But underneath the CCPA, they've vastly broadened that definition. There was a white paper that was just released two weeks ago by the state, and they look at things like biometric data, social media connections, email addresses, IP addresses, any kind of demographic information you're collecting about consumers in a specific market. All of that information now is considered non-public or consumer data underneath the CCPA. And so companies really need to have a good handle on where they're storing that data, who's accessing that data, and have methods around alerting when data is lost or stolen. Now, the CCPA does establish some requirements on how big or complex the company organization has to be. It's either 25 million in gross revenues or 50,000 consumer records, right? Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, hey, we don't have that big of a footprint in California. I can tell you that there are other states looking at this legislation, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, to saying, hey, our friends to the south are having all the fun. We need to also look at doing something similar. So it really is important that we have a good handle on where our data is, who's accessing that information, and having good audit logs around if that information's been accessed or destroyed. And when we're shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about the threats. And as I mentioned earlier, the bad guys are trying to monetize these attacks, right? Gone are the days of bragging rights and putting shame in your face, if you will, that you had a data compromise. These guys are in it to make a buck. And we've seen an interesting trend over the last several years. In 2018, almost following the devaluation of Bitcoin, we saw an increase in email fraud, and this was business email compromise as well as phishing attempts for wire fraud. And the bad guys were really using more of a shotgun approach, right? And it was a numbers game. They'll hit as many targets as they possibly can. They may get, if they did get an email account for an organization, they would do a specific spear phish and try to target an individual or a number of individuals that company was doing business with. And when you look at research from the industry, an email security provider called Proofpoint, they found an 85% increase in these emails being sent in the fourth quarter of 2018. What's interesting as we got into 2019 is Bitcoin started increasing in value again. And with that increase in value, we also saw an increase in return to ransomware. And in the mortgage banking space, you've probably been hearing a lot about ransomware attacks, especially since this summer. And within that, there's some interesting facts. One, 75% of companies that were infected with ransomware, they were running up-to-date antivirus, right? They had some sort of protection in place. 34% of those impacted companies, it took them a week or longer to regain access to their data. And year to date, ransomware has increased 109% compared to where we were seeing ransomware attacks in 2017. And as you guys know, there was a reasonably sized mortgage company in late June of this year that ended up paying $1.6 million in ransom because of the loss of access to their data. And the other key piece here is that phishing is still the initial point of compromise, right? The threat actors are trying to instill some sort of urgency when they reach out to you. And that could be in the form of sending you a malicious link that looks like access to a title company's portal or an appraisal report, or it could be a weaponized Word document that looks like a disclosure or some other document that you're using through your origination cycle coming in from a borrower. And once you've been compromised, right, this is where the bad guys really try to work against you, looking at how your size and complexity of your organization. They look at what kind of data you have, where that data is stored, and how they can lock that information down. And as I mentioned before, we're also seeing that business email compromise. And that recent report from CNBC found that these BEC attacks, the average loss per attack is about $130,000, right? So these are very impactful numbers, especially for mid-market, mid-sized companies. So what are we doing, right? So there's a lot of different things we're doing in the mortgage space, but one of the biggest drivers is a focus on additional resources, additional functionality at a lower or similar cost to what we were spending before. And that's really where the cloud comes in, right? We're seeing mortgage companies leverage cloud infrastructure and cloud SaaS platforms such as Microsoft Office 365 and Google's G Suite. And there's a couple different value adds for that, right? It adds a level of disaster recovery and business continuity and resiliency to the organization, but it also changes your cost model, right? We're seeing growth in the cloud space reaching nearly 117 billion in revenues because by 2021, because companies are finding value in that variable cost model. That they know how much technology is going to cost them as they add or remove headcount. But when you go to the cloud, there's a couple things that you really need to understand, right? The first being is it's still a third-party vendor you need to manage, right? You need to really make sure that you're doing business with good, reputable companies, and understand that there's a shared security responsibility, right? In that shared responsibility model, while the cloud hosting provider will cover off on the physical security elements of your program, you're still responsible for keeping track of who's accessing that data, how where that data is stored, how the life cycle of that information, and making sure you have a good audit trail around the different data that you're putting there into the cloud. And what that means is traditional security tools aren't going to work in that environment. You have to really think of new and innovative ways to meet those demands. And what does that mean? What happens if you have a misconfiguration or something goes wrong in the cloud? And it really means that you're going to have a data breach, right? We've seen a number of these recently. One being with Capital One again over the summer, where they had a data loss and data leakage due to misconfiguration of their Amazon S3 buckets, right? They didn't have appropriate controls to monitor who was accessing those. The permissions weren't locked down. And what that leads to is a threat to your consumer and at times your employees' data privacy, right? That data breach and the loss of confidentiality of that information, we know is going to lead to not just costly remediation fees, probably additional regulator oversight, right? When you have an incident and it's in the news, it's probably not too long before the regulators call and say, hey, I think it's time for our annual audit. So these are the kinds of things that companies need to think about when they move to the cloud. And again, they have to look at where their data is, who's accessing that information, and have a good audit trail and controls over that data. And so with that, I want to introduce Joey Sorensen for Managed Methods. And he's going to talk a little bit about how they solve that problem with having good controls over your data in the cloud.
Thanks so much, JT, and thank you everyone for joining us here this afternoon. As JT mentioned, I'm with Managed Methods, and we're a cloud security provider headquartered out of Boulder, Colorado. We've been in the business for about 5 years now, but it's really been, I'd say, in the last year to 18 months or so, we've seen a real groundswell of folks who are using these cloud-based email and file sharing applications like Google G Suite and Office 365 start to really look for a solution like ours that will help provide them that comprehensive visibility and security they've been looking for. We've been partnering with Richey May, as JT alluded to, for since 2018 last year, and are excited to work in the financial services industry here, which is a strong place where we feel like we can help and where we have helped some customers in addition to retail, entertainment, and the education market. Our strategic focus is securing those two, major behemoths of G Suite and Office 365. We do also work with some other applications, including Slackbox and Dropbox, but our two big ones are Google and Office 365, which are dominate the SaaS productivity landscape in the market space today. Google has doubled the size of their field sales force over the next 18 months, trying to take market share from Office 365, which remains the dominant player in commercial enterprises. And we see a lot who, might even use both in conjunction with one another to some extent. Maybe some departments use Google and others use Office 365, and we can support both. Rapid adoption rates for moving to the cloud for so many reasons. As JT mentioned, it cuts down costs as well as personnel needed at times. It can be convenient for folks since we have a more mobile work-life balance today where people can work remotely from home and so forth and on personal devices. But that also opens up a can of worms security-wise that organizations are just now starting to catch up with today, looking at platforms like ours to provide that visibility. So in mortgage banking, why is cloud security, a concern? Why is it something to, take a closer look at? Well, all of your clients' sensitive financial and personal data could be at risk if there's a breach, which has been made significantly easier in some ways by this move to the cloud. For instance, if you have a corporate officer working from a Starbucks on a personal laptop, traditional security measures like firewalls and such that are perimeter-based won't help you in that sort of situation. So you need some sort of security products that can remediate, delete a phishing email, for instance, before someone has an opportunity to click on it, alert you if sensitive information is being sent out, show you if accounts are compromised and logging in from unfamiliar or suspicious locations. And in the case that there is a breach, it can risk a whole lot. It can risk your client's data, it can risk your firm's reputation in the market space, and it can also lead to just terrible embarrassment, as we saw in the case with Sony when they were hacked a few years ago. So solutions like ours look primarily for those sorts of risks that I was mentioning: malware, phishing, to prevent those sorts of threats from coming in from the outside, show you if there's suspicious login activity, objectionable content that's being shared, maybe inappropriate content, and unauthorized sharing or downloading of sensitive data. So what makes managed methods a little bit different from some of the other providers in our market space, which is categorized as CASB by Gartner, which stands for Cloud Access Security Broker. We think that's a little bit of a misnomer because the broker part sort of signifies that you are a proxy or gateway type approach, which we find is unnecessarily cumbersome and not as effective for our clients. We take an API-based approach, so there's no proxy or gateway, and if you decided to move forward and activate our product, it would be as simple as activating it from the Google Play Store, downloading it, doing a domain-wide install in your environment, and then we can start providing you that comprehensive visibility and security into your domain, which would provide rapid time to value to have that visibility. So in terms of the nuts and bolts of how we do what we do, the first piece of it, threat protection, that's keeping those bad guys out, keeping the folks out who are going to try to monetize your data by stealing it. So we'll scan all bodies and attachments in emails, as well as files in Drive, Google Drive or Share Drive for G Suite, OneDrive, SharePoint in the Office 365 world for any harmful malware or DLP violations, phishing attempts. For phishing, we use a couple different resources. Google Safe Browsing does a great job of finding the very commonly used phishing links. Fish Tank is another resource we deploy that has a very large compendium of phishing links that they're always adding to whenever we come across one that they don't have in their database yet. We send it along to them and they add it. We'll also show you all user-enabled third-party cloud apps connected to your environment, which can be a big area of concern increasingly. I think we saw maybe a good example of this that I used to illustrate is when everyone a few months ago on Facebook was using that Face app to make yourself look older, and then didn't realize at the time that, oh my gosh, I'm giving this Russian company access to all of my photos forever and ever when I do that. We'll show you any user-enabled third-party cloud apps that have been connected to your environment by a user downloading it and creating an account using their credentials for your organization. Because when they did that, they granted certain scopes and permissions to those apps, which then could be potentially harmful, particularly if it has access to, for example, read, write, send, and delete email in your domain. So we'll show you that and give you the power to revoke access to those apps. On the data security front, we'll look for sensitive data such as social security numbers and credit card numbers. In addition, we deploy Google Vision API to look inside of images for that. So if someone takes a picture of a credit card or writes down a social security number on a piece of paper, we can and have been able to detect that as well. And then having that image scanning capability enables us to look for if there's inappropriate content as well, if that's a concern, perhaps sexual harassment, workplace bullying, anything like that, we could detect if that's an area of concern. The final place of it, account monitoring, that is analyzing user login access and providing geographic information to assess whether you have nefarious behavior, whether that's compromised accounts and so forth. You'll be able to see who's downloaded what files and if they've shared them and gain insight that way as well and have comprehensive visibility into your Drive and email environment. We offer a free 30-day risk assessment. So I'm about to show a demo of our platform where you can see it in action, and I'll demonstrate all the various features I just mentioned. If you are interested, please feel free to reach out to me. We'll provide our contact information, and then you can also sign up using this form to create an account and get a free cloud risk assessment to see what's lurking in your environment. So I'll go ahead and move to the demo now. On our platform, when you first log in, this is the main page. There'll be a tile for every cloud app that you are using in your environment. So if you're just using Office 365, you'll just see that here. If you're using Google or Dropbox or any of these as well, they'll come up as well. You just click View to jump right in. Oh, need to log back in again. There we go. So jump right in, I click View. When our product is first activated, we go back 30 days and look at historic data, and then it's continuous rolling coverage moving forward. So I'll go down to 1 month to see some more data here. In the upper left-hand corner, the first thing to notice is this risk box. So here we'll show you all of the risk that's been flagged by our DLP scanning engines in the time frame you're looking at. So PII, personally identifiable information, PCI, I'm sure you're all well familiar with it. We'll show you the number of risks that have been determined. And in parentheses here, we'll have numbers next to an envelope and a document. There's an envelope, that means that these risks were found in email, either the body or the attachment of an email. If there's a document icon, it means that it was found in files and folders, so OneDrive, SharePoint, in the Microsoft world. I'll go ahead and show you Google as well, just to show that it looks essentially exactly the same in Google versus Microsoft, just the terminology is different of, shared drive versus SharePoint, OneDrive versus Google Drive. If there's any risks that we're not scanning for out of the gate that you'd like to scan for, it's very easy to add risks, and we're happy to help with this process. So if we go under the admin panel to risk underneath data management, this will have a listing of the things that we can scan for. So if there's a green circle, that means the scan is enabled. If it's red, that means it's disabled. Here's some examples of some things that our customers have asked us to scan for. So we have some customers in Canada who wanted to scan for passport, social insurance numbers. If you want to add a risk, you click the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner, give the risk a title, put in what keywords you want to search for, or do a regex risk pattern. And again, we're happy to help with this as necessary. You can also upload a file if it contains a list of all of the words that you want to search for terms. But I'll jump right back to the product. So in here, that covers the risks box. I mentioned third-party apps earlier. That'll be in this middle panel at the top. It'll show you the risk level that we've assessed the app to have based on its level of scopes and permissions and the percentage of our customers who have whitelisted that app. I'll also show you what category they're in the pie chart here. I'll show you what's going on in your cloud email environment, popular external domains you're exchanging data with, what risk has been found, as well as phishing and malware that have been flagged by our scanning engines. In the middle of the page here, it'll show you what's going on with your files and folders in OneDrive and SharePoint, and then what's been flagged by our malware scanning engines. And here at the bottom will be geolocation login information. We get a lot of positive feedback from our customers on this map that this is perhaps the first time they've had, something this easy on the eyes to demonstrate to them where folks are logging in from. You can get very granular with filters in terms of what you want to look for here. The client apps included. A lot of folks like to filter to see login successes because that'll be, obviously much more concerning than failed logins. So every pin on the map will represent a successful login into the domain. You can click on the pins and see who's logging in from that location. And if you click on the user's name, you can get more data about their login histories, what IP address they logged in from, location, time, and so forth, application that they logged in from. If there's concern about a certain user, you can come here and check their name against a database called Have I Been Pwned, which you may be familiar with, which is a listing of all of the known compromised accounts that have had activity on the internet. So we'll look at it against that database and determine if it's a compromised account. To get more data on accounts, you'll just go here to the Accounts tab, one to the right. We'll show you accounts in your environment, when they last logged in from, apps that have been detected, groups, and if they have any risks, you'll see that over here in Files. So if there's a hazard icon, it means that there's some DLP risk that's been detected. A bug is malware. Fishhook is phishing. But once again, you can come through here, get insight into their recent login history, and take action. So If I determine this account has been compromised or has some risk associated with it that needs to be remediated immediately, you can suspend the account using this button right here. You can restore it, and you can also change the user's password right from our product here and get very granular in terms of what they've been doing in Drive. On files, we'll give a comprehensive overview of what's going on in OneDrive. So you'll be able to see, again, very easily which files contain risk, who's owning files, and then who they're sharing the files with. If I filter this one, you'll notice that this link icon is either orange or blue. If it's orange, then that indicates that a file is being shared with an external domain. If it's blue, then that means it's only internal to the domain. This globe icon means that a file is being shared via a link where anyone who has the link can view and edit the file. And then you can take action over here in the far right column. So you can quarantine a file, which will move it out of the user's OneDrive where they no longer have access to it, and put it into the administrative OneDrive in a folder called cam_quarantine. You can download it right from our product to look at it for yourself. You can delete it permanently from the environment, and if something's being stored internally and shared with the outside, you can unshare it using this sort of scissors-looking icon. You can also do that in bulk. Something that we see, a remarkable amount is that a lot of folks like to store a lot of movies in their OneDrive as well, even for work. So if that's something you want to just get an insight into, you'd go file type audio video, for example, and see what movies are detected in the environment. If there's any pirated movies, you can unshare them or delete them here. In email, next tab over, similar visibility into what's going on in your email environment. So once again, we flag what contains risk, show you who sent the emails, the recipients, what mailbox internally something's being held in. And you can also very easily filter it if you just want to look at the phishing emails. You click the View Phishing Emails up here, and you can preview emails using this blue button that shows you an open envelope. So that'll open it up in a new tab, and I've never seen that before, but it'll open it up generally in a new tab on your browser where you can take a look at that email and see it for yourself. So live email search, one tab to the right, you can do a live API call over your email domain. So we've seen this come very much in handy for some of our customers. A great use case for this is, as I mentioned, the risk of phishing earlier. If someone clicks on a phishing email, has a compromised account, and the user who's gained access to it begins sending phishing emails from the inside. Using this form, you can say, I want to see all emails sent from a certain account containing these words sent on this date. We'll do a live API call over your domain and pull all the emails that meet that criteria, and then you can bulk delete them if you so choose. So we've had prospective customers of ours who were interested in moving forward, but their trial ended. They were waiting for their new fiscal year to purchase, reached out to us frantically that, hey, we need to get our instance up and running. We just had, the CFO's account get compromised. They used this feature to pull up all those emails that were getting sent, the phishing emails from the inside that looked very convincing, and delete them very quickly here. SharePoint will show you what's going on in your shared files here. Pretty self-explanatory, show you the files contained there, site groups, who's in the various groups. In apps, this will be what I was mentioning earlier with the third-party apps. We typically see this as less of a concern for O365 environments than it is for Google. Google just tends to encourage a lot more apps and extensions, but you have that same visibility in both places. Access levels, the one, as I mentioned, that's usually the most concern is going to be mail, because if there's an app that has access to mail that has a history of being compromised or just looks rather risky, that could pose a big dilemma if it does get hacked. For instance, we'll go under scope categories and see the various categories that some of these apps have. If we go to this one, we'll see that it can read, write user mail. You can see every certain scope that an app has, read and write items in all site collections, read user mail. If this says read, write, send, and delete, and manage mail, that's the biggest area of concern if it's an app that you don't recognize or looks like it might be suspicious. So, and if that was the case, Azure app is probably fairly safe, but if this was something that you were concerned about, you could remove the app, warn the user they're using an unapproved app, sanction it, which gives it the seal of approval where you can put it in a separate bucket and exempt it from actions, unsanction it if you change your mind later on, and you can also share it via email with a colleague to alert them about it. Over in the risks tab, this will get into more detail about those risks in the top of the summary tab that I was showing you earlier. We'll show you the various types of risk that have been found, and you can easily filter for the files that contain that form of risk. Under risk details here, if you click view, it will show you exactly what the risk is that was detected. So in this case, it was a couple social security numbers that look like they were found. If we go into basic information, it shows you who created the file, who's owning it, the type of file it is, and where it's being shared, both internally and externally. And you can take action, again, just as we showed you over in apps. So if it's a false positive or something not of concern, you can ignore the risk, and that'll remove it from this dashboard. You can also instruct our scanning engines to ignore that similar pattern in the future if it's coming up repeatedly. You can quarantine files, you can delete them, and if you've previously quarantined something, you can restore it as well. And just as in apps, again, you can share something via an email also. Final tab right here to the right is going to be malware. So this will show you what's been flagged by our malware scanning engines. They'll be labeled either suspicious or malicious depending on our level of confidence of whether it's malware or not. We use a number of top-of-the-line malware scanning engines that are integrated into our product to look for this. We'll give you a threat score value, so 99 out of 100 on this one. Definitely smells like malware. You can download a report to see why it's flagged and the certain parameters that were detected within this file that made it look like it's a positive for malware, and take action from here, as well as taking action in bulk for things that have been detected positive for malware. So I've shown you a lot of various actions you can take, but we know that you all are busy people and don't have time to be hopping in here all the time. So we also make it very easy to automate any actions you want to take, and that will be through policy. You can also automate alerts this way. So up here at the top, if you click Notify Admin on Policy Violation, whoever is listed in this email box will receive notifications when any of the actions specified here in policy take place. So going through it here, some instance of ones that people often like to put in place, a malware policy, for instance. We just talked about malware. You can say, I want to automatically delete malware as soon as it's detected in the environment. You can put a delay if you want, probably not the best idea for malware. And then on remediation, you can set notifications either to the user or to yourself whenever this remediation takes place. You can also get alerts if any forms of risk are going out to external domains or coming in, or you can specify which types of risk you want that to apply to. So you can say, PCI or PII or image risk or something of that nature. Very easy to add policies in our products. Out of the box, look but don't touch. We don't want to take any action until you as an administrator have been trained on the products and have specified that you specifically want to take a certain action. But just to show how easy it is, I'll show you. I'll create a phishing policy here. In this case, you'll specify what source, so it's email in the case of phishing. I'll X out a dry file. Underneath threats, go to URL scan. If you wanted a policy to apply to a certain user group or an individual user, you can do that as well. We'll click apply and have it apply to the whole domain, and then you can say automatically delete phishing emails as soon as they're detected when they come in. In user policies, this is very relevant for the compromised accounts we were mentioning. You can say anytime there's a login from a blacklisted country, which out of the box we have the United States whitelisted and thus every other country in the world is blacklisted. If you have a highly mobile international traveling workforce, it's very easy to add countries to the whitelist. That would be if you just click the pencil icon up at the top above here. Go down here and you can add other countries to the whitelist, or if you would just rather blacklist specific bad actor countries like North Korea, China, Russia, for instance, you can do that instead. But here in the policy section, you can create a policy whereby you will automatically suspend accounts or change passwords when a user is logging in from a blacklisted country. If you want people only logging in from a certain IP range, you can do that as well. Set it up whitelist as IP range, and then set it to reset a user's password or suspend accounts if they log in from outside of that as well. Once you've got your policies in a place that you like them, here in the product on the last tab of policy violations, we'll show you all of the entities that have violated policy in the time frame you're looking at, users and content. You'll be able to see what policies were violated exactly, and if you had remediation set, and whether that remediation is scheduled for the future or has already been executed. So I think that covers a lot of ground here today. We get a lot of great feedback from our customers that our user guide is very handy and easy to understand. You can access that at any time from our product with this light bulb in the upper right-hand corner. We have step-by-step guides to anything you might want to do, all of our recent release notes. Say I want to remove malware. We have a step-by-step guide from that, showing you what you see on your screen as you follow the instructions, highlighting the button that we're asking you to press, and usually, 5 to 7 steps on any of these guides, and it's very easy to understand. If you have any questions that you don't find answers to here, you could submit a request, and we have a phenomenal support team that's eager to respond and help resolve any issues and answer any questions that come up. So with that, I invite you, if this looks interesting, to go ahead and check out the free risk assessment, which I'm sure we'll be providing the link to following the webinar. Appreciate everyone's time today, and I'll pass it back over for any final thoughts or questions that may have come up.
Great, so go ahead, and if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat so that we can get them answered. And again, don't forget to answer the survey after you exit the webinar as well. And we will be sending out the materials in an email, as is, kind of typical of these things, so that you can reread the presentation, especially the slides that had a lot of text that you can refer back to. And of course, if you have any questions that you think of later, feel free to contact any of us either at Managed Methods or at Richey May, where we'll be happy to help you with any questions focused around cybersecurity, whether that's cloud apps or any other general area. We have a lot of experience with the mortgage industry and the specific issues that are unique to our business. So, again, thank you for joining, and go ahead and add your questions to the chat. We do have a question from an audience member. Their question is, how does this tool compare to the tools available in MS Azure?
Well, my understanding is that they're just very different. Be an expert in Azure, but we don't have much to do with Active Directory and all of that. I would say that my understanding from our customers who have used Office 365 historically is that our tool makes all of the data that is relevant in your environment much more easy on the eyes, easy to find than Microsoft tools often are. In addition, the fact that we cover multiple cloud app suites, including Google and Slack and Box, Dropbox, and so forth, is another differentiator as well. I think that might cover it to the extent I can think of.
Yeah, I'll just add on that a little bit there. I mean, obviously, both G Suite and Microsoft's platforms have a number of inherent security tools that are there, and I think building on Joey's statement, many of those tools aren't necessarily intuitive, or they may not be available depending on the license level that you may have in place. And so that's one of the key differentiators I think that are there too, is from a business cost analysis. You have to understand what controls and tools you need in place to meet your specific business needs. But in addition to that, the CASB space is really focused on the data that's stored in the specific SaaS platforms, right? Whereas Azure is more of an infrastructure type platform, and so it's really that key differentiator as well, and understanding what are your specific business needs. It's not necessarily this tool versus that tool, but each tool has a specific need and business driver behind it.
Great, thanks for answering that, both JT and Joey. And it doesn't look like we have any other questions, but again, feel free to reach out to any of us if you have something specific, exactly like that question that we just received. So again, thank you for attending, and look forward to that email from us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.